frequency, gain, bandwidth, cut, boost, Q factor. So you're trying to learn about EQ, but what on earth do all these numbers actually mean? Hello, home music creators. EQ, or equalization, is such a powerful tool in music production, especially mixing. But it's one of those things that can seem impenetrable with all the terminology that's bandied around. It's actually not that hard to understand. All the terms describing things are actually quite simple. First things first, what is EQ? EQ is basically a fancy volume control. With a normal volume control, if you turn up the volume, it turns everything up. It will turn up, drums, bass, guitars, keyboards, vocals, strings, whatever. Similarly, if you turn it down, it turns everything down. EQ allows you to only turn up certain parts of the sound, certain frequencies. For example, just the bass or just the treble. Very much like tone controls on a hi-fi or a car stereo system. I like to think of EQ as a very detailed, very granular set of tone controls. We can use EQ plugins in our DAWs. Your DAW will almost certainly provide one. I'm going to show you the one that's provided with Reaper, as that's the DAW I use, and it's called Rear EQ. Let's take a look at those numbers. First one, and perhaps easiest to understand, is the frequency. All music, all sound, all audio, it consists of frequencies. The range of human hearing is from about 20 hertz up to 16 to 20 kilohertz. So yes, frequency is measured in hertz, with 1000 hertz being the same as 1 kilohertz. Now it's not a linear scale. The numbers get big quite quickly as you go up into the higher frequencies. So the low numbers are your bass frequencies, the very high numbers are your very high treble frequencies, and you've got everything in between. For example, from about 60 hertz to 250 hertz is your bass frequencies. You typically increase those to add a bit more bassy punch or warmth, decrease them to get rid of some boominess. And from 6 kilohertz up to about 10 kilohertz, you've got high frequencies. You can boost these to add a sort of high-end sparkle and air, and cut them to reduce sort of shrill quality to the sound. And we can demo this. So I've got this very simple little guitar part here, which I've looped. Let's pick a frequency. So let's pick, I don't know, let's pick about 300 hertz. So we're in the sort of low mid-range area here. And I'm going to ridiculously exaggerate my EQ moves here. So I'll play this and then I'll move the EQ up and down to show you the effect it's having. So there you could hear I was drastically boosting and then drastically cutting that sort of 300 hertz area in that guitar part. And that leads us nicely onto our next term, which is gain. Gain is simply how much you are choosing to boost or cut the frequency. It's that simple. So you could see as I was moving this up, you can also see the gain little knob moving to the right there as it increases. Similarly, if I move it down, it moves to the left. And the amount, that is the gain. It's as simple as that. It's usually measured in decibels. Positive numbers are a boost, negative numbers are a cut. So you can see if I boost it here, you can see that number is positive. If I cut it, you can see that number is negative. Let's now talk about bandwidth. Now, if you see as I'm moving this up and down, it's not just the exact frequency that's changing, the frequencies around it are also increasing or decreasing. The amount that this happens is called the bandwidth. You may have heard people referring to how wide you should make your cut or boost with EQ, and that's what bandwidth is referring to. It's essentially how wide this affected area is. Bandwidth is usually measured in octaves. It's essentially how many frequencies near the frequency you are changing are affected. Confused? Okay, let's try and illustrate by an example. So we select a frequency to cut or boost. A narrow bandwidth means the cut won't affect many of the surrounding frequencies. A wide bandwidth means it will affect a lot of the surrounding frequencies. And we can see this, so let's boost that there, and then let's change the bandwidth. As I'm moving this, you can see the amount of frequencies affected is reducing. So if I move it there, it's very, very small amount of frequencies that are affected. If I do the opposite and I move it way to the right, it's a huge amount of frequencies around it that are affected. And that is basically bandwidth. There's a general rule in mixing with EQ in that you should cut narrow and boost wide. So if we want to do a cut, we would probably make it quite narrow. If we wanted to do a boost, we would probably make it quite wide. That's only a general rule, and there are always going to be exceptions to that, but that's generally considered the way to go with mixing using EQ. One last thing related to bandwidth. Sometimes you will hear a term called Q factor. Now this is essentially bandwidth. It's another way of specifying it, but it's the inverse of bandwidth. So the bigger the bandwidth, the smaller the Q factor. The bigger the Q factor, the smaller the bandwidth. Don't let this confuse you when working with EQ. You can think of it as the same as bandwidth, except the numbers work the other way around. So increasing bandwidth is the same as decreasing Q factor. Decreasing bandwidth is the same as increasing Q factor. That's basically it for EQ. If you understand those few terms, then you're well on the way to being able to understand EQ and working with it in your music. Please check out the companion article to this video on homemusiccreator.com, which goes into much more detail, including different types of EQ you can apply, such as high and low pass filters, shelves, notches, etc. I highly recommend that you read that if you want to take your EQ knowledge to the next level. I shall put a link in the description below. Thanks very much for watching. This is Paul from Home Music Creator signing off. See you in the next video. Cheers.